The security guard looked uncomfortable as he watched me pack my office. "I'm sorry, Ms. Parker," he said, shifting from foot to foot. "Miss Catherine insisted we supervise." I carefully placed my framed computer science degree into a cardboard box, fighting to keep my expression neutral. "It's fine, Joe, just doing your job." Catherine, my sister, now apparently my ex-boss, had always had a flair for the dramatic. Of course she'd make this as humiliating as possible. "My name is Samantha Parker, and at 34, I'd just been legally outmaneuvered from the tech company I'd built from scratch. Parker Tech had been my dream since college, a cybersecurity firm that had grown from my laptop in a garage to a 200-employee operation worth millions. But I'd made one crucial mistake, trusting my sister when she offered to handle the legal side of things. "Don't forget to turn in your access card," Catherine's voice rang out from the doorway. She stood there in her perfectly tailored suit, every blonde hair in place, looking exactly like the corporate lawyer she'd become. "We wouldn't want any unauthorized access to company systems." I bit back a laugh, if she only knew. "Here," I said, unpinning my ID badge and holding it out. "Anything else you need to supervise personally?" Her smile was cold. "Just making sure everything transitions smoothly. The board is very excited about the company's new direction." The board, handpicked by Catherine over the past year, gradually filled with her law school friends and business connections. I should have seen it coming, but I've been too busy actually running the company, developing our breakthrough encryption software. "You won't be able to run it," I said quietly so only she could hear. "You don't understand the technology, the development process. That's what employees are for," she cut me off. "Besides, I understand the most important thing, how to make money. Which is more than I can say for you and your endless research projects." She was right about one thing. I prioritize development over profits, focusing on creating something revolutionary rather than just commercially viable. Our new quantum-resistant encryption protocol had eaten up millions in research funds, but it was almost ready. Almost perfect. Almost, but not quite. I picked up my box and walked toward the door. Catherine's voice stopped me. "Oh, and Sam, Dad wanted me to remind you that his offer still stands. There's always room for another lawyer in the family firm." That was the final twist of the knife. She knew how much I'd disappointed our father by choosing computer science over law school. Now she'd proven him right about which path led to real success. Or so she thought. Later that evening, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by screens showing lines of code. My phone buzzed. A message from David Chen, my lead developer. "Team meeting set for tomorrow. Off-site location. Everyone who matters is in." Good. At least my actual team understood what was happening. I opened my laptop, not the corporate one I'd surrendered, but my personal machine, and began typing. Deep within Parker Tech's systems, buried in millions of lines of code, was something Catherine and her board would never find. Not until it was too late. The quantum encryption protocol hadn't been perfect when Catherine made her move. In fact, it had a very specific flaw. One that only I knew how to fix. A flaw that would become apparent at exactly the right moment. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus Zhang, our head of operations. "Kay just announced new leadership team. All corporate lawyers, no tech background. She's killing R&D department next week." Exactly as I predicted. Catherine saw our research division as a money pit, not realizing it was the heart of what made Parker Tech valuable. She'd replace innovation with litigation, patents with lawsuits. I typed a brief response. "Stick to the plan. Keep everything documented." The next morning, I met my core team at a small coffee shop across town. 20 people, developers, researchers, the ones who built Parker Tech's technology from the ground up, sat waiting for me. First, I began. "Thank you for coming. I know Catherine's been making threats about non-compete agreements. Those won't hold up," Lisa, our HR director, who quit the moment I was pushed out, interjected. "Not with the documentation we have about how the takeover happened." I nodded. "True, but that's not why we're here. David, show them." David opened his laptop, displaying a series of code repositories. Everything we've been working on for the past year, the quantum encryption protocol, the neural network security system, all of it has been properly backed up and documented, including all the development logs showing who actually created these systems. But the company owns the intellectual property, Tom, one of our senior developers, pointed out. Catherine made sure of that. I smiled. The company owns what they think is complete, working software. What they actually have is a version with a very specific vulnerability, one that only becomes apparent when you try to implement it at scale. Understanding dawned on their faces. Mark, our head of testing, let out a low whistle. The beta version. You never uploaded the final fixes. Because I knew this was coming, I confirmed. Catherine spent a year positioning herself to take control, but I spent that same year preparing for exactly this scenario. I pulled out a stack of papers and corporation documents for a new company. Welcome to Quantum Security Solutions. We're small, we're independent, and we're about to revolutionize cybersecurity. Who's in? Every hand in the room went up. Over the next few weeks, we worked in secret, setting up our new operation while watching Catherine systematically dismantle everything we built at Parker Tech. She brought in corporate lawyers to run development teams, focused on patent litigation instead of innovation. The press releases were glowing. Parker Tech announces new direction under dynamic leadership. The stock price even went up initially as Catherine promised increased profits through aggressive market positioning. Then came the day I've been waiting for. Sam, David called from his workstation in our small new office. They're trying to implement the encryption protocol for their first major client. I moved to watch over his shoulder as error messages began flooding Parker Tech's internal systems. The flaw I'd left in the code, elegant, subtle, but catastrophic at scale, was emerging exactly as designed. My phone lit up with a text from Lisa, who still had friends inside Parker Tech. Complete chaos. Systems rejecting all security certificates. Keys losing it. I could picture it. Catherine in her perfect suit, facing angry clients and board members, trying to explain why their revolutionary security system was collapsing. She blamed the development team she'd fired, the research she'd defunded, everyone but her stuff. But the best part was still to come. Catherine's call came exactly 3 hours after Parker Tech's systems began failing. I let it go to voicemail, listening as her carefully controlled voice cracked with panic. Samantha, if you're behind this, I swear to God. The board is threatening to sue. Our biggest client is talking about criminal charges. Fix this, now. I waited another hour before responding, just long enough for the first news stories to break. Parker Tech's security system fails major implementation test. The company's stock was already dropping. When I finally called back, Catherine answered on the first ring. What did you do? She demanded. Me? Nothing. I've been busy starting my new company. How's the encryption protocol working out? Don't play games, she snapped. Every system is failing. The code, something's wrong with it. Of course something's wrong with it, I said calmly. It's not finished. The version you have is a beta build with a critical vulnerability. The finished version with the fix, that's proprietary technology belonging to Quantum Security Solutions. The silence on the other end was deafening. You see, Catherine, I continued, while you were busy with your legal maneuvers, I was documenting everything. Every development step, every test, every improvement, including the final fixes that make the system actually work. All properly dated, signed, and witnessed. That's impossible, she whispered. The company owns all the IP. The company owns what was in its systems when you took over. The critical updates that make it functional? Those were developed independently after you pushed me out. And before you try claiming otherwise, I have timestamps, blockchain verification, and witness statements from the entire development team. I could practically hear her mind racing, looking for a legal loophole. The non-compete agreements are void due to the hostile takeover, I finished. Your own actions invalidated them. You might want to consult a lawyer about that. Oh wait, you are one. Later that day, Parker Tech's board called an emergency meeting. Catherine tried to blame the system failure on sabotage, on disgruntled employees, on anything but her own actions. But the evidence was clear. The version of the encryption protocol they owned simply didn't work without the updates. Updates that now belong to my new company. Updates that their entire business model depended on. The next week was chaos. Parker Tech's stock plummeted as clients began pulling out. The board members Catherine had so carefully cultivated turned on her, realizing their legal backgrounds hadn't prepared them to handle a technical crisis. Then came the offer I'd been waiting for. Miss Parker. The call came from James Martinez, Parker Tech's largest investor. We need to talk about acquiring quantum security solutions. I smiled. I'm not interested in selling. Name your price, he pressed. Parker Tech needs those updates. No, I said firmly. What Parker Tech needs is new leadership. Someone who understands that technology companies should be run by people who understand technology. There was a long pause. You want your company back. On my terms, complete control of technical development, a board that includes actual tech experts. And Catherine? She needs to go. The negotiations took 2 weeks. In the end, Parker Tech's board had no choice. Their company was worthless without the encryption protocol updates, and their shareholders were demanding action. The day I walked back into my old office, Catherine was waiting. She'd lost her polished look. Her hair was messy, her expensive suit wrinkled. You planned this, she said. All of it. I learned from you, I replied. You taught me that sometimes you have to think like a lawyer, document everything, prepare for the worst, protect your interests. I just applied those lessons to technology instead of legal proceedings. She laughed bitterly. Dad was right about one thing. You would have made a hell of a lawyer. Maybe, but I prefer building things to tearing them down. The reconstruction of Parker Tech took months. We merged it with Quantum Security Solutions, rebuilding the development team and implementing the complete encryption protocol properly this time. Catherine moved to California, taking a position with a corporate law firm. She never apologized, but she did send me a message when our quantum encryption system won a major industry award. Congratulations, you proved me wrong about everything. Even lawyers can admit when they've lost. The framed computer science degree went back on my office wall, now joined by patents and awards that proved technical innovation could be more powerful than legal manipulation. Dad even called to say he was proud, though he still mentioned that the family law firm had an opening if I ever changed my mind. I kept the beta version of the encryption protocol, the one with the elegant flaw, framed in my office as a reminder. Sometimes the best defense isn't in the code you write, but in the code you don't write. And sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies, but about building something they can't touch. 1 year after the takeover attempt, I stood in Parker Tech's new research lab, watching my team work on our next breakthrough. The quantum encryption protocol had revolutionized cybersecurity just as I'd known it would. But more importantly, it had proven that technical excellence, not legal maneuvering, was the true path to success. Catherine's nameplate from her brief tenure as CEO sat in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that power based on manipulation is always vulnerable to truth and competence. The company she tried to steal had become something greater than either of us had imagined, precisely because her actions have forced me to protect and perfect our technology in ways I might never have considered otherwise. Sometimes I realized the people who try to destroy you end up making you stronger. Not because of what they do, but because of how you choose to respond. That's the thing about technology. In the end, it doesn't care about legal documents or corporate maneuvers. It only cares about whether it works. And making things work, that's what I do best.
My name is Olivia Chin, and I learned early that success doesn't always look the way your parents expect it to. Standing outside my childhood home on Christmas Eve, I adjusted my simple black sweater and tried to quiet the voice in my head telling me this was a mistake. 10 years. 10 years since I'd walked away from my family's expectations, their constant criticism, their narrow definition of success. Now here I was back for Christmas dinner, clutching a bottle of wine that cost more than my father's monthly salary. Not that they needed to know that. The familiar sound of laughter drifted through the windows, mixed with the clink of glasses and the soft melody of Christmas music. Inside, my parents were hosting their annual Christmas dinner, an event that had always been more about business networking than family celebration. I knocked on the door, my knuckles barely touching the wood before it swung open. My mother stood there, her face a perfect mask of polite disappointment, an expression she'd mastered over the years specifically for me. "Olivia," she said, her voice carrying that familiar note of disapproval. "You're late." I checked my watch. "Actually, I'm 5 minutes early." She ignored my response, turning back to the house. "Everyone's already here. Try not to embarrass us." The living room was exactly as I remembered, tastefully decorated in my mother's preferred neutral tones, with a Christmas tree that looked more like a department store display than a family celebration. The room was filled with familiar faces. Local business owners, my father's colleagues, and of course my successful older brother Michael, who was deep in conversation with someone I didn't recognize. My father spotted me from across the room, his expression darkening slightly. He excused himself from his conversation and made his way over, martini in hand. "So," he said, not bothering with a greeting, "still doing that little online business thing?" I took a slow breath. "It's a digital consulting firm, Dad. And yes, it's going well." He scoffed, taking a sip of his drink. "When are you going to get a real job? Your brother's just been made partner at his firm. He's handling accounts worth millions. What do you have to show for yourself?" Before I could respond, my mother joined us, steering a well-dressed couple in our direction. "Oh, Margaret, John, have you met our daughter?" Her tone carried that subtle note of apology she always used when introducing me. "She's exploring different career options." I felt my face grow hot as Margaret raised her perfectly shaped eyebrows. "Oh, what kind of work do you do, dear?" "I run my own company," I started, but my father cut me off with a laugh. "Look at our useless daughter," he chuckled, the alcohol making him bolder than usual. "Can't even get a real job." My mother joined in with a practiced laugh. "At least Michael is carrying on the family legacy. Sometimes I wonder where we went wrong with Olivia." The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. I'd built Horizon Digital from nothing into a company that was about to close a $50 million deal. But here I was, still that disappointing daughter who couldn't meet their expectations. The doorbell rang, cutting through the humiliation. My mother's eyes widened with excitement. "Oh, that must be James Anderson. He's considering a major contract with your father's firm." As she hurried to the door, I reached for my CO badge in my purse, the one I'd almost left in the car. I'd come straight from our office Christmas party, where I'd given a speech to our 200 employees. The badge with its embossed logo was still clipped to my bag. The front door opened and I heard my mother's overly cheerful greeting. "Mr. Anderson, we're so honored you could join us." Heavy footsteps approached the living room. I turned and time seemed to freeze. James Anderson, the CEO of Anderson Technologies, stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes locked onto my badge, then my face, then back to my badge. "Madame Sue," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I didn't know these were your parents." I felt a small smile tugging at my lips as I watched my parents' faces drain of color. The badge on my purse caught the light, displaying clearly, "Olivia Chen, CEO of Horizon Digital Industries." The same company that was about to acquire the biggest tech firm in the city. The same company that had just signed a $50 million deal with Anderson Technologies. The same company my parents had dismissed as my little online business thing. My father's martini glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Sometimes karma arrives in the most unexpected moments. And sometimes, it arrives wearing a CEO badge at your family's Christmas dinner. The silence that followed felt eternal. Shards of my father's martini glass glittered on the floor, much like the pieces of their perfectly crafted illusion shattering around us. Mr. Anderson stepped forward, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the tension. "I must say, Olivia has been absolutely brilliant in handling our recent partnership. The innovation her team brought to the table." He turned to my parents, beaming. "You must be incredibly proud." My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. My father seemed frozen in place, his face ashen. Michael, my ever-successful brother, had suddenly found great interest in his shoes. My mother started, her voice trembling. "Of course we're proud." The lie tasted bitter in the air. Mr. Anderson continued enthusiastically. "When she proposed the $50 million digital transformation project, I'll admit I was skeptical. But her presentation was flawless. Speaking of which," he turned to me, "I heard rumors about your upcoming acquisition of TechCore Systems. Quite ambitious." I could practically hear my father's neck snap as his head whipped toward me. TechCore Systems was the biggest tech firm in the city. The same one his company had been desperately trying to partner with for years. "That's still under wraps, Mr. Anderson," I smiled politely. "But I'm sure we'll have some exciting announcements in the new year." My mother, ever the social navigator, quickly tried to regain control. "Why don't we all move to the dining room? Dinner's ready to be served." The next hour was excruciating. I sat at my childhood dining table, watching my parents perform the most dramatic transformation I'd ever witnessed. Gone were the snide remarks and disappointed sighs. Instead, they were falling over themselves to highlight their sudden pride in my achievements. Olivia has always been so independent, my mother gushed, conveniently forgetting her earlier comments. Takes after me, really, my father added, as if he hadn't spent years telling me I was wasting my potential. I caught Michael shooting me nervous glances throughout dinner. He'd always been the golden child, the one who followed our parents' carefully planned path. Now he was realizing that path might not have been the only route to success. As dessert was being served, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and had to suppress a smile. It was an email confirming that Horizon Digital had just closed another major deal, this one worth $75 million. Important business? Mr. Anderson asked, noticing my expression. You could say that, I replied, tucking my phone away. Your end is always busy. Oh, speaking of business, Mr. Anderson turned to my father. About that contract we were discussing. My father straightened up eagerly. This was what he'd been waiting for, the reason he'd invited Mr. Anderson to Christmas dinner. I think we'll be going in a different direction, Mr. Anderson said smoothly. After seeing the innovative work Horizon Digital is doing, we're planning to modernize all our systems. In fact, Olivia, I'd love to discuss expanding our current contract. The sound of my father's dreams crashing was almost audible. Later, as guests began to leave, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my mother. She was loading the dishwasher, her movements jerky and tense. Why didn't you tell us? She finally asked, not looking at me. Would it have mattered? I countered. When I started Horizon Digital, you told everyone I was between jobs. When I landed my first major client, you said I was still finding myself. At what point would you have actually listened? She turned to face me, and for the first time I saw something new in her eyes: fear. Fear that she'd been wrong all along. Fear that she'd backed the wrong child. Fear that all her carefully laid plans and social maneuvering had been for nothing. We just wanted what was best for you, she whispered. No, I replied firmly. You wanted what looked best to others. I grabbed my purse from the counter, the CEO badge catching the light once more. I should go. I have an early meeting tomorrow. With TechCore. My father's voice came from the doorway. He looked older somehow, deflated. Among others. I moved past him but stopped at the threshold. You know what's ironic? All I ever wanted was for you to believe in me. Now that everyone else does, it doesn't matter if you do or not. The drive home was quiet, but my phone kept buzzing with notifications. First came a text from Michael. I had no idea. Can we talk? Then an email from my mother. Darling, I know we've made mistakes. Please give us a chance to make it right. Finally, a message from my father. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I pulled into my garage, the same one they'd mocked me for buying in an unfashionable neighborhood. Now it housed my Mercedes alongside my first car, the beaten-up Honda I'd lived in for 3 months while bootstrapping my company. Inside my home office, I opened my laptop and clicked on a folder labeled Remember Why. Inside was a collection of emails, text messages, and photos, years of dismissive comments, missed celebrations, and thinly veiled insults from my family. I added a new entry. Look at our useless daughter. Can't even get a real job. Below it, I added today's date and a note. The day they finally saw me. My phone buzzed again, another message from my father. About the TechCore acquisition. Maybe we could discuss a potential partnership? I closed the folder without replying. Tomorrow, I would announce Horizon Digital's acquisition of TechCore Systems. Tomorrow, I would sign contracts worth more than my father's company's entire annual revenue. Tomorrow, I would continue building something that was entirely mine. But tonight, I sat in my quiet office looking at my reflection in the window. The useless daughter who had built an empire. The disappointment who had become a CEO. The failure who had succeeded on her own terms. I thought about the badge that had caused such chaos. It wasn't just a piece of plastic with my name and title. It was proof that success doesn't always look the way others expect it to. Sometimes it looks like a daughter who stopped trying to meet her parents' expectations and exceeded them anyway. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Grant, your 8 a.m. tomorrow is confirmed. The TechCore board is ready to sign. Thank you, Sarah, I replied, then added, send flowers to my parents' house tomorrow. The card should read, Thank you for teaching me that the best revenge is massive success. I closed my laptop and walked to the window looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably still sitting in their kitchen, realizing that their useless daughter now held the key to their business future. Sometimes the best Christmas gifts aren't the ones wrapped under the tree. Sometimes they're moments of clarity that no amount of money can buy. And sometimes, they're the priceless expression on your parents' faces when they realize their biggest mistake was underestimating their own daughter. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new acquisitions, new opportunities. But tonight I had given myself the best gift of all. I had finally stopped seeking their approval and shown them why I never needed it in the first place.
The invitation arrived in my mailbox, not as a guest, but as a service provider. Catering contract, Palmer 40th anniversary celebration, was printed in elegant gold lettering across the cream envelope. I stood in my kitchen, hands trembling as I opened it, already knowing what I'd find inside. My name is Charlotte Palmer, and at 35, I'm one of the most sought-after chefs in Boston. My restaurant Maison has 2 Michelin stars and a 6-month waiting list. But to my parents, I'm still just the disappointment who chose cooking over law school, the daughter who embarrassed them by working with her hands instead of following the path they'd laid out. The contract was typical, expected number of guests, 200, dietary requirements, and a proposed menu that made me wince. It was exactly the kind of safe, predictable food my mother would choose. At the bottom, her signature was already there, along with a note in her precise handwriting. We expect nothing but perfection for this event, Charlotte. Don't embarrass us. I set the contract down on my kitchen counter, next to the morning's mail. Among the pile was another letter, this one from my grandmother's lawyer. I'd been avoiding opening it for days, but something about the timing felt right. With steady hands, I broke the seal. Dear Ms. Palmer, it began, as executor of your grandmother Eleanor Palmer's estate, I am pleased to inform you that following the reading of her will, you have been named the sole inheritor of both her estate and her shares in Palmer Industries. I had to read the words 3 times before they sank in. My grandmother, my father's mother, had left everything to me, not to him, not to my perfect older sister Margaret, but to me. The estate, the shares, even her beloved vineyard in Napa. Everything my father had assumed would be his was now mine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Have you reviewed the contract? We need an answer by tomorrow. Your father insists on having Maison cater this event. Of course he did. Despite refusing to eat at my restaurant, despite never acknowledging my success, they still wanted to use my name, my reputation, to impress their friends. I thought about all the family events I'd been excluded from over the years, all the times they'd made it clear I wasn't good enough to be a Palmer. I picked up my phone and typed, "I'll do it. Send me the guest list and I'll handle everything." "Excellent," she replied instantly. "The guest list is attached. Remember, nothing too experimental. These are sophisticated people, Charlotte." I opened the attachment, pages of names, the who's who of Boston society. My name wasn't among them, of course. I was just the help. That evening, as I sat in my office at Maison reviewing the contract, my sous chef Marcus knocked on the door. "Hey boss, you okay? You've been staring at that paper for an hour." I looked up at him, a plan already forming in my mind. "Marcus, remember when we talked about that pop-up concept, the one with the interactive tables and performance elements?" He nodded, eyes lighting up. "The one where we turned dinner into theater?" "Yeah, that was brilliant. But you said it was too risky for Maison." "It is," I agreed, a smile spreading across my face. "But I think I found the perfect event to test it out." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Your parents' anniversary? Are you sure that's wise?" I handed him the letter from my grandmother's lawyer. As he read it, his eyes widened. "Holy shit, Charlotte. This changes everything." "Yes," I said, feeling more confident than I had in years. "Yes, it does. Call the team. We're going to give my parents an anniversary celebration they'll never forget." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the preparations. Every detail was meticulously planned, every element carefully chosen. I hired performers, designed custom tables with built-in screens, and created a menu that would tell a story, my story. My mother called constantly, trying to micromanage everything. "Charlotte, the Hendersons are vegetarian now, and the Whittakers don't eat shellfish. Are you sure you can handle all these restrictions?" Everything is under control, I assured her each time, not mentioning the real plans taking shape behind the scenes. A week before the event, my sister Margaret showed up at Maison during dinner service. She stood at the host stand, perfectly coiffed in her designer suit, looking down her nose at everything. Charlotte, she called across the dining room, ignoring the stares from other guests. We need to talk about the anniversary party. I led her to my office, closing the door behind us. What's wrong, Margaret? Mother is worried you're going to try something unconventional, she said, examining her manicure. She's heard rumors about some of your more experimental dishes. This needs to be a proper society event, not one of your artistic statements. I smiled, thinking about what was coming. Tell Mother not to worry. This will be exactly the kind of event this family deserves. Margaret gave me a suspicious look but left without further argument. As I watched her walk away, I felt a moment of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to use my parents' anniversary to make a point? Then I remembered all the missed birthdays, the cold shoulders at family events, the constant reminders that I wasn't good enough. Yes, I decided. Yes, I was. The day of the event arrived, and I arrived at the venue early with my team. The ballroom of the Four Seasons was transformed according to my vision. Interactive tables with embedded screens, hidden projectors, and a specially designed sound system. Everything was perfect. My mother arrived for the final inspection, her face pinched with worry. Charlotte, what are all these screens for? This looks more like a tech conference than an anniversary celebration. Trust me, Mother, I said, my voice steady. Everything has been planned to perfection. Just like you wanted. She didn't look convinced, but it was too late to change anything. The guests would be arriving in a few hours, and the show I planned was about to begin. Little did they know, this anniversary celebration would be talked about in Boston society circles for years to come, just not for the reasons they expected. The guests began arriving at 6, filing into the ballroom in their finest attire. From my position in the kitchen, I watched through the service entrance as my parents greeted everyone, accepting congratulations and gifts with practiced grace. My father in his custom tuxedo, my mother resplendent in a designer gown. They looked every bit the power couple they'd worked so hard to become. I checked my watch. 20 minutes until dinner service would begin. My team moved with precision around me, each person knowing their role in what was about to unfold. The interactive tables were already programmed, the projectors tested, the timing rehearsed to perfection. Charlotte, Marcus called softly from beside me. The lawyer's here. I nodded, watching as my grandmother's attorney, Mr. Harrison, took his seat at one of the central tables. He was the only person besides Marcus who knew what was coming. His presence was essential for what I had planned. At precisely 6:30, my mother clanked her glass, signaling for everyone to take their seats. The tables, which appeared normal except for their slightly glossy surface, would soon come alive with my story. Before we begin dinner, my mother announced, her voice carrying across the room, Robert and I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate 40 years of marriage. And of course, we must thank our daughter Charlotte for catering this evening's meal. A polite smattering of applause followed. I noticed how she didn't refer to me as their daughter, just Charlotte. Always keeping that distance, that distinction. I stepped out of the kitchen, nodding acknowledgement to the guests. My father didn't even look in my direction, too busy chatting with some business associates. Margaret sat at the family table, perfectly poised, occasionally glancing at me with barely concealed disdain. The first course arrived, a seemingly simple dish of heirloom tomato soup. As the bowls were placed before each guest, the table suddenly illuminated. Projected onto the glossy surface were images of my childhood, family dinners where I sat alone at the kitchen counter while they entertained in the dining room, holidays where I was relegated to helping the staff rather than joining the celebrations. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the images played out. My mother's face tightened, but she couldn't say anything without causing a scene. This soup, I announced, my voice clear and strong, is made from tomatoes grown in my grandmother Eleanor's garden. The same garden where she taught me to cook while everyone else was too busy to notice I existed. The second course brought more revelations. As waiters served perfectly seared scallops, the tables showed my graduation from culinary school, an event my parents hadn't attended. Alongside it played clips from my restaurant's opening night, reviews from food critics, and a ceremony where I received my first Michelin star. Your scallops are paired with a sauce made from wine produced at Eleanor Palmer's vineyard, I explained, watching my father's face carefully. The same vineyard that, along with her entire estate and shares in Palmer Industries, she left to me in her will. The room went silent. My father's head snapped up, his face draining of color. My mother's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. What did you say? My father demanded, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped across the floor. Mr. Harrison chose that moment to stand, clearing his throat. What your daughter says is correct, Mr. Palmer. Your mother's will was quite clear. Everything, the estate, the vineyard, and her 30% controlling interest in Palmer Industries was left to Charlotte. The ballroom erupted in whispers. My father's business associates exchanged significant looks. They knew what this meant. With my grandmother's shares, I now had significant control over the company he'd spent his life building. This is ridiculous, Margaret burst out, her perfect composure cracking. There must be some mistake. Why would grandmother leave everything to her? I smiled, signaling for the next course to be served. Because Margaret, while you and Dad were too busy running the company to visit her, I spent every Sunday cooking with her, listening to her stories and sharing her love of food. She saw me even when none of you did. As the main course arrived, a perfectly aged ribeye with truffle butter, the tables displayed one final set of images, my grandmother and me in her kitchen, both of us laughing as we cooked together. Her last Christmas, when she insisted on having dinner at my restaurant instead of the family mansion. The day she first tasted my food and cried, saying she was proud of me. Your main course, I announced, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me, is served with vegetables from Eleanor's garden and wine from her vineyard. She always said that good food brings people together, but only if they're willing to sit at the same table as equals. My father remained standing, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Charlotte, he growled, we need to discuss this. Now. No, Dad, I replied calmly. We don't. Everything has already been decided. The papers were signed this morning. But don't worry, I won't run the company the way you did. I believe in giving people a chance to prove themselves, regardless of whether they fit into some predetermined mold. The rest of dinner service continued in tense silence, broken only by the quiet murmurs of guests trying to process what they'd witnessed. My mother sat rigid in her chair, barely touching her food. Margaret kept shooting venomous looks in my direction, while my father seemed to age years before my eyes. As dessert was served, a deconstructed apple pie, my grandmother's recipe, I made one final announcement. In honor of my grandmother's memory and her belief in nurturing talent wherever it's found, I'm establishing a culinary school scholarship program. The Eleanor Palmer Foundation will provide full funding for aspiring chefs who, like me, might not fit society's expectations but have the passion and drive to succeed. I watched as my words sank in. This wasn't just about inherited wealth or company shares. This was about changing the narrative, about creating opportunities for others who might have been overlooked or dismissed. The evening ended earlier than planned, guests making polite excuses to leave as the tension in the room became unbearable. As the last of them filed out, my father finally approached me, his face ashen. You've ruined everything, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Was that your plan? To humiliate us in front of everyone we know? I met his gaze steadily. No, Dad. My plan was to show you exactly what you've been missing all these years, what you threw away because it didn't fit your perfect vision of what this family should be. The aftermath of my parents' anniversary celebration sent shockwaves through Boston's elite social circles. The story spread quickly, how Charlotte Palmer, the outcast chef daughter, had inherited her grandmother's fortune and used her parents' own anniversary to reveal it. The morning after, I sat in my office at Maison reviewing the paperwork Mr. Harrison had prepared. The ownership transfer was complete. I now controlled not only my grandmother's estate but also had significant influence over Palmer Industries. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the event. Texts from Margaret ranged from threats to desperate attempts at reconciliation. My mother's messages were similarly mixed, alternating between guilt trips and offers to discuss things like family. But it was my father's single email that caught my attention. Charlotte, what you did last night was calculated and cruel. You've not only embarrassed this family but potentially damaged the company I spent my life building. If this was revenge, congratulations. You've succeeded. Your father. I read it twice before clicking reply. Dad, this wasn't about revenge. It was about showing you what you threw away, not just with me, but with your own mother. While you were busy building your empire, you missed what was happening in your own family. Grandmother saw it. That's why she made the choice she did. I don't plan to damage the company. Unlike you, I believe in giving people chances. Come by Maison tonight at 8 if you want to talk about the future. Charlotte. To my surprise, he showed up. I watched through the kitchen window as he entered the restaurant, looking uncomfortable and out of place. He'd never set foot in Maison before, had never tasted my food or acknowledged my success. I led him to a private dining room where I prepared a simple meal, his mother's recipes, the comfort food she used to make when he was young. As he sat down, I noticed how old he suddenly looked, how tired. Your grandmother, he said finally, staring at the bowl of beef stew I placed in front of him. She used to make this every Sunday. I know, I replied softly. She taught me. She told me stories about you while we cooked. How you loved this stew, how you'd help her in the kitchen before the business took over your life. He took a bite, and I saw his hands shake slightly. It tastes exactly the same, he whispered. She wanted you to have more than just the business, Dad. She wanted you to remember what it was like to care about something beyond success and status. That's why she left everything to me, not to hurt you, but to make you stop and think. Over the next 2 hours, we talked more than we had in years. He told me about his own dreams of becoming a chef before his father pushed him into business. I shared stories about grandmother that he'd never heard, moments he'd missed while chasing his definition of success. I don't expect forgiveness, he said as the evening wound down. What we did to you, how we treated you, it was wrong. I'm not looking for apologies, I replied. I want change, real change. Starting with how Palmer Industries treats its employees, how it views success. He nodded slowly. And how do you propose we do that? First, we established the Eleanor Palmer Foundation properly. Not just culinary scholarships, but programs for employees' children, support for small businesses, community outreach. Then we look at the company culture. No more promoting people just because they fit a certain mold. To my surprise, he didn't argue. Instead, he asked, "Will you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to cook," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "These recipes, your grandmother's recipes. I'd like to learn." That was 6 months ago. Now, every Sunday, my father comes to Maison early before we open. We cook together, and sometimes he tells me stories about his mother that I never knew. Margaret eventually came around, especially after I offered to teach her too. She's actually quite good with pastries, though she never admitted to her society friends. My mother took longer to accept the changes, but even she has started attending our Sunday cooking sessions. Last week, she asked me to teach her how to make grandmother's apple pie. The Eleanor Palmer Foundation is thriving. We've already provided scholarships to 15 aspiring chefs, and our community programs are making real differences in people's lives. Palmer Industries is changing too, slowly but surely becoming a company that values more than just the bottom line. As for me, I'm still running Maison, still creating and experimenting. But now, when I look out into my dining room, I sometimes see my family there, enjoying my food, being part of my world. It's not perfect. We still have our moments of tension, our old habits that die hard. But last night, as I watched my father carefully chopping vegetables in my kitchen, his tie tucked into his shirt to keep it clean, I realized something. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about hurting those who hurt you. Sometimes it's about giving them a chance to change, to see the world differently, to taste what they've been missing. My grandmother understood that. That's why she left me her legacy. Not to divide the family, but to give us a chance to come together again, around a different kind of table. The menu at Maison still features that tomato soup from the anniversary dinner, but now beneath its description on the menu, there's a small note. From Eleanor's Garden, where every meal tells a story and every story deserves to be heard. It's become our most popular dish. The antique grandfather clock chimed 3 times as I watched my sister Rebecca storm out of our grandmother's study, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors with vengeful precision. The family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, shot me an apologetic look before gathering his papers. "Miss Clark," he said softly, "your grandmother was very clear about her wishes. The estate belongs to you." My name is Olivia Clark, and at 28 years old, I had just inherited not only my grandmother's substantial fortune, but also her business empire, Clark Industries. a fact that my older sister found absolutely unacceptable. I ran my fingers along the smooth mahogany desk where my grandmother had spent countless hours teaching me everything she knew. If only Rebecca understood that this moment had been years in the making. She'll contest it, I said, not looking up. You know that, right? Mr. Harrison nodded, tucking the will into his briefcase. Your grandmother knew she would. That's why she made certain arrangements. 5 years ago, when I moved in with my grandmother after graduating college, everyone assumed it was because I had nowhere else to go. Rebecca had called me a failure, pointing out how she was already a successful corporate lawyer while I was living off grandma's charity. What they didn't know was that every morning at precisely 5 a.m., my grandmother would wake me up for our lessons. The world is full of Rebeccas, she told me that first morning, pouring us both coffee in delicate bone china cups. People who think success is about what you display on the surface. But real power, Olivia, real control, that comes from understanding what's beneath. I spent the next 5 years learning everything about Clark Industries from the ground up. While Rebecca bragged about her corner office and designer wardrobe, I was in the company warehouse at 6 a.m., learning inventory management from workers who'd been with the company for decades. Your sister visits me for Sunday brunch, Grandma would say, a knowing smile on her face. You live here, learning everything I built. Which do you think matters more? Now, watching Rebecca's Mercedes peel out of the driveway, I thought about all those early mornings, late nights, and weekends spent in the office. Everyone thought I was just Grandma's live-in caretaker. Even my parents had suggested I get a real job instead of wasting time playing nurse. They never knew about the advanced business courses I took online, or the leadership training programs Grandma enrolled me in. They didn't see me studying financial reports late into the night while Grandma quizzed me on company history and strategy. Mr. Harrison, I said, turning to face him. How long do we have before Rebecca makes her move? He checked his watch. Knowing your sister, she's probably already on the phone with her firm's probate department. I give it 48 hours before they file the initial challenge. I nodded, moving to the ancient filing cabinet in the corner. This was where Grandma kept her most important documents, the ones that weren't digitized or stored in the company's servers. I pulled out a thick folder labeled Contingencies. She taught you about this too, didn't she? Mr. Harrison asked, watching me with growing understanding. Grandma taught me everything, I replied, opening the folder, including exactly what to do when Rebecca tried to take what isn't hers. Inside were detailed records of every mistake Rebecca had made while working as outside counsel for Clark Industries. Every questionable billing practice, every conflict of interest she'd forgotten to disclose, every time she used company information for personal gain. Your sister thinks she's the smart one, Grandma had told me once. But she's careless. She leaves traces. Remember that, Olivia. In business and in life, it's not the obvious threats you need to worry about. It's the quiet ones who are really watching. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Hope you enjoyed your little victory. When my lawyers are done, you'll be lucky if Grandma's china set is still yours. I smiled, thinking of the lessons Grandma had drilled into me. Never react emotionally to a threat, she'd say. Emotion clouds judgment. Strategy requires clarity. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I called Maria Santos, Grandma's longtime assistant and my secret mentor for the past 5 years. It's time, I said when she answered. Rebecca's making her move. Everything's ready, Maria replied, and I could hear her smile. Your grandmother left very detailed instructions. Shall we begin? For the next several hours, Maria and I executed the plan Grandma had prepared. First, we contacted the board members, not the official board that Rebecca knew about, but the advisory board Grandma had quietly assembled over the past 5 years. People who had worked with me, mentored me, and knew exactly what I was capable of. Then we reached out to key clients and partners, using relationships I built during my wasted years working in different departments. While Rebecca had been climbing the corporate ladder at her law firm, I'd been learning every aspect of our family business. By midnight, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from Rebecca's allies in the company, all suddenly very concerned about their positions. They backed her because they thought she was the obvious heir, a successful lawyer, the polished businesswoman. Now they were learning that Grandma had been grooming a different kind of leader. I sat in Grandma's study, now my study, looking at her photograph on the desk. She was young in the picture, standing in front of the first Clark Industries warehouse. A woman building an empire in a time when women weren't supposed to run companies. Your sister thinks power comes from titles and corner offices, she told me during one of our last conversations. But real power comes from understanding every gear in the machine, from knowing the people who make it run. I taught you everything I know, Olivia. The question is, are you ready to use it? The grandfather clock struck midnight, and I stood up, straightening my simple black blazer. Rebecca would arrive at her office tomorrow to find that several key clients had already called to express their confidence in my leadership. The board would convene an emergency session to ratify my position, and her attempts to challenge the will would run into a wall of documentation showing exactly why Grandma had chosen me. But first, I had one more lesson to remember. I opened Grandma's safe, using the combination she taught me years ago, and pulled out an envelope marked for Olivia, when Rebecca shows her true colors. Inside was a letter, written in my grandmother's elegant hand. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then Rebecca has reacted exactly as I knew she would. Power reveals people, darling. It shows us who they truly are. Your sister sees the world as a game to be won. You see it as a legacy to be preserved. That's why you're reading this letter in my study, and she's probably sitting in her office right now, plotting her next move. But remember, this isn't about beating Rebecca. It's about being worthy of what I've built. I chose you not because you're smarter or better, but because you understand what Clark Industries really is, a family of people working together to build something meaningful. Don't let anger or resentment guide you. Lead with the wisdom I know you possess. And remember, sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies, but in showing them a better way. All my love, Grandma. I folded the letter carefully, placing it in my desk drawer. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but I was ready. Grandma had made sure of that. My phone buzzed again. Another angry text from Rebecca. I smiled, thinking of all the lessons, all the early mornings, all the quiet preparation that had led to this moment. Rebecca thought she was at war with her little sister. She had no idea she was facing someone who'd spent 5 years learning to be a general. The morning after the will reading dawned bright and cold. I arrived at Clark Industries headquarters at 5 a.m., a habit I couldn't break even now. The security guard, Tom, greeted me with a knowing smile. He'd seen me arrive at this hour hundreds of times over the past 5 years, though until yesterday everyone thought I was just the boss's granddaughter who helps out. My first stop was the executive floor, not to my grandmother's old office, but to the small conference room where the real work happened. Maria was already there, surrounded by documents and her ever-present laptop. Rebecca's lawyers filed the challenge an hour ago, she said without looking up. They're claiming diminished capacity and undue influence. I poured myself coffee in my grandmother's old mug, right on schedule. Have they realized yet? Maria's smile was sharp. That your grandmother had quarterly psychological evaluations for the past 5 years? Or that every major decision about your training was documented and witnessed by independent parties? The filing just landed on Mr. Harrison's desk. He's probably enjoying his morning coffee while reading it. At 9 a.m. sharp, my phone rang. Rebecca. You think you're so clever, she hissed when I answered. But I just spoke to the board. They're calling an emergency session to review Grandma's decision. You really think they'll support some inexperienced little girl over me? I let her rant, remembering Grandma's lessons about patience. The meeting's at 2 p.m., I said when she finally paused for breath. I'll see you there. What Rebecca didn't know was that I'd spent the past 5 years getting to know every board member. Not through fancy dinners or social events, but through actual work. Mr. Chen from operations had taught me supply chain management. Mrs. Rodriguez had mentored me in finance. They'd watched me learn, grow, and prove myself while Rebecca was busy climbing the corporate ladder elsewhere. At 1:55 p.m., I walked into the boardroom. Rebecca was already there, wearing an expensive suit and a confident smile. She'd arranged her allies on one side of the table, leaving me to face what she thought was a united opposition. Before we begin, Rebecca announced, standing up, I think we need to discuss the stability of Clark Industries under its current situation. My legal team has prepared a detailed analysis of why my grandmother's decision needs to be reviewed. I waited until she finished her practice speech about experience, qualifications, and her deep concern for the company's future. Then I nodded to Maria, who started distributing folders to each board member. What's this? Rebecca demanded, flipping through the contents. A 5-year strategic plan for Clark Industries, I replied calmly. One that I developed with input from each department head, based on my direct experience working in every division of the company. The board members were reading now, their expressions changing as they recognized projects they discussed with me, improvements they'd suggested, innovations they dreamed of. Furthermore, I continued, you'll find audited financials for the divisions I've been quietly managing for the past 3 years. Average growth of 27% year over year, employee satisfaction up 40%, and client retention at an all-time high. Rebecca's face had lost its confidence. That's impossible. You were just Grandma's caretaker. Mr. Chen cleared his throat. Actually, Ms. Clark, your sister has been effectively running our Asia-Pacific operations since 2021. That expansion plan you praised last quarter. That was her work. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. And the new financial modeling system the company adopted last year, Olivia developed that after spending 6 months analyzing our inefficiencies. One by one, board members began sharing stories of projects I'd worked on, problems I'd solved, innovations I'd implemented. All while Rebecca thought I was just playing nurse to our grandmother. This is ridiculous, Rebecca snapped, but her voice had lost its edge. I'm a qualified corporate lawyer. I have actual business experience. Yes, I said softly, you're a lawyer, but I'm a leader. Grandma knew the difference. I pulled out one final document, the letter Grandma had left for this exact moment. Dear board members, I read aloud, if you're hearing this, then you're deciding between my 2 granddaughters. One has spent her career climbing ladders. The other has spent 5 years learning to build them. Choose wisely. The future of Clark Industries depends on someone who understands that a company is not a trophy to be won, but a legacy to be nurtured. The vote was unanimous. As Rebecca stormed out of the boardroom for the second time in 2 days, I thought about calling after her. Part of me wanted to explain, to help her understand what Grandma had tried to teach us both. But then I remembered one of Grandma's final lessons. Sometimes, Olivia, the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them learn from their mistakes. Rebecca will either grow from this or she won't. That's her choice to make. In the weeks that followed, Clark Industries thrived under the plans I'd spent years developing. Rebecca eventually dropped her legal challenge when she realized how thoroughly Grandma had documented everything. 1 month after the board meeting, I received a package from my grandmother's lawyer. Inside was a small key and a note. For when you're ready to teach the next generation what I taught you. Love, Grandma. The key opened a hidden compartment in her desk, revealing decades of journals documenting her journey building Clark Industries. As I sat reading them in the quiet of my office, I understood her final lesson. True legacy isn't about inheritance or control. It's about wisdom passed down, lessons learned, and the understanding that real success comes not from defeating others, but from building something worthy of being passed on. Rebecca never did understand that. But as I watched the sun rise over Clark Industries each morning, arriving at 5 a.m. just like Grandma taught me, I know I'll be ready when the next generation comes seeking wisdom of their own. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in proving others wrong, but in proving your teachers right.